What's up? I have Astronaut Abby here with me today. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks.
So I'm happy you finally got to come on. I wanted to kind of get basically get to know you a little bit and share your story with everyone. I know you got into what you're doing now at a really young age, and you've done quite a bit since then. So let's just jump right into that.
Yeah, so to tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about my story, I aspire to be an astronaut and I hope to be the first astronaut to walk on Mars. And like you said, I started down the path towards this dream at a pretty early age. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, it's my first memory of wanting to become an astronaut, and I've been working towards it ever since. So that's about 2 decades because I'm 23 now. And in that time, I've been able to travel the world speaking to students and school groups and at conferences about space and about STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. I've gotten a pilot's license, advanced training in scuba diving, parachuting. I've learned Russian and Mandarin Chinese. I have an undergraduate in biology and research experience doing field work in Siberia and also working in a NASA-funded Mars astrobiology research lab. And now I am the founder of a nonprofit called the Mars Generation, a new author of a book called Dream Big, How to Reach for Your Stars, and I'm currently working as a scientific researcher at Harvard Medical School. And I'm out of breath after all of that.
My brain hurts. Like you
Woo!
make me feel lazy. I thought I was busy. Oh my God, that's crazy. Ooh. Well, all that being said, yeah, and I'd love to talk about a little bit of all of that. How does this happen? How do you, like okay, so someone your age, being so motivated, so driven, and being in all these things, and I mean, literally everything that you just mentioned is a huge achievement for, a normal everyday person. What motivates, how does that happen?
I've always had this really strong drive and passion for space exploration. And as I got older, I realized that not only was I really passionate about space exploration, but I'd learned to become passionate about STEM education as well,
Mhm.
and making sure that it was equitable in the sense that there's a lot of kids out there who don't have access and don't have exposure and don't have support in STEM. And I realized really quickly that I had the opportunity and the ability to share my experiences working towards this big goal, and also to even go a little bit farther than that and to do educational outreach work in STEM. And so that's something that I feel really driven towards now, and that drives a lot of what I do. But as far as I tend to think of those things as separate categories and parts of my life. One of them is my educational outreach work, and the other one is my own dream, my actual life's passion, I guess you could say, of becoming an astronaut and going to Mars.
Yeah.
They're interrelated, but to me, they're separate sets of work. And the reason for that is because a lot of the stuff that I do to become an astronaut is stuff that relates, like I said, to the educational outreach
Mhm.
work, but isn't the same. So as far as my own drive towards those things, like learning languages, becoming a pilot, all of
Yeah.
that, um, that's something that it's really hard to say where that kind of drive comes from. I was actually talking to my grandma a couple days ago because she called me and wanted to congratulate me on publishing my book recently. And I asked her, because I've been doing so many interviews lately about my new book, and I
Yeah.
asked her, Grandma, do you remember me talking about this when I was a kid? And she says, oh yeah, I remember you talking about this. And then the next words out of her mouth, I think, really encapsulate this question exactly. And she said, I had absolutely no doubt that you would pursue this and that you would be successful at pursuing your dreams as well, because you were the most driven, most dedicated, most serious
Yeah.
child about this dream that you had. And I think that that's something that as a little kid I had, and as I got older, I really I stuck to my guns on following through on this.
Well, I mean, yeah, when we're younger, you have those aspirations and dreams, of what you may want to be, but typically they don't go any further than that. You know what I mean? So being that you pursued this, and I feel like you've laid the foundation for every piece that needs to happen moving, and doing it at such a young age too. So like, what's interesting to me is, so, the Mandarin and the Russian, I'm assuming that's because that's something that's going to be needed in that, moving forward into space exploration. And it's
Yeah, so it's a really good question to ask, like how the heck does learning foreign languages or other languages, how does that relate to space exploration?
Yeah.
And the answer for that is that up until recently, it was actually not a requirement for astronauts, for American astronauts to learn Russian, but it was definitely encouraged, because up until recently, between 2011, when the shuttle program ended, and now 2020, I suppose we're in 2021, but this happened in 2020 when we started sending American astronauts to space from American soil again.
Right.
For that period of about 9 years, we were actually using the Russian Soyuz to launch astronauts to the International Space Station, which meant that every astronaut that went to space had to be able to train in Russia for a certain period of time, and then launch from Russia and be able to understand and communicate. And so if you didn't speak Russian, it wasn't an issue. NASA would definitely train you to a level where you weren't probably fluent unless you're really a whiz at that, but were proficient for what you needed to do. But it was definitely like a boon on your resume if you already spoke Russian and they didn't have to put in that extra time and effort to train you in Russian. So I figured early on, I'm just going to knock that one out. I'll learn Russian. And then at the same time, I thought to myself, like, what else do I think will be important in the future of space exploration? What types of partnerships and collaborations in space do I see happening between the United States and other countries? And the biggest one that I could think of at the time was China. China is an upcoming player in a lot of industries, and space exploration is not different. And so I looked at that and I said, I can't guarantee that this will be helpful in the future, but it's such an interesting language, such an interesting culture, and it has the potential to be helpful for future cooperation. And so I put that one on my docket as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's something. Yeah, I mean, you're being proactive with those things, knowing that that's something that's going to have to be used. And as we grow, as one world, and we're all operating in space, I mean, we're going to have to be able to cohesively make those blend together. So you're already being proactive about it. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So what, now getting into the education, well, first off, like, so you're now working at Harvard as a scientist. How does that happen?
Yeah, so it's pretty it's a pretty exciting step to have taken in my career, and it's actually one that I graduated last year. I graduated back in 2019 from Wellesley College with a degree in biology, and I took a year before I entered my position at Harvard, where I'd been intending to travel through part of the year. I'd been planning a solo backpacking trip across Russia and China, which would have been so exciting, but as happened to many people, I had to scrap that because of the pandemic and to be a responsible global citizen and all that. But instead, I was able to spend about half that year working for a nonprofit in Wyoming that does place-based education using the beautiful night skies of Wyoming to teach people about astronomy and to tie in science and to really work on science literacy with the public. And then I also spent a lot of time that year working with my own nonprofit, the Mars Generation, on expanding and growing our programs and writing my book. And then, working on getting it published and all of that as well. And then I'd always planned, not always, but when I was in college, I'd planned and intended to take that gap year of sorts away from academia, away from science, because I'd wanted to really gain perspective on this field that I was entering, because a lot of times in science, it has a tendency to be really it has a tendency to be really introspective. And so you get scientists who, from the time that they're 17 or 18 years old, they go in for a science degree and then they just stay in school forever. And then they enter into academia and into research and all of this stuff. And I wanted to make sure that I was making the right choice for me of what I was doing with my life, what I was studying, and also gaining these kinds of life skills and maturity, really. And for me, a gap year was the perfect way to do that. And then entering back in, as far as ending up working at Harvard, that's one where I just got really lucky that I was entering back into the science and research industry, and I was applying to places, and I found this lab that just was the perfect fit. And I've been here a couple months now, and it's been like, I can't be any happier to be working at this lab than I am.
Well, so what are you exactly doing there within, studies and research and, experiments and all that? What are you doing currently?
Yeah, so the lab that I work at is called the Jackson Lab. We
Okay.
study immunology, molecular biology, and genetics. And in particular, one of the big focuses of our lab is looking at the human genome and looking at certain parts of the human genome that have been in the past considered to be not important, or considered to be kind of like junk DNA, like DNA that's there
Yeah.
and doesn't do anything. It doesn't code for genes. It doesn't really help us in any way. And my lab thinks that that's not true. And we think that there are answers to be found in those portions of the genome. And in particular, we think and hope that there are answers that relate to immunology. So the way that our bodies react in diseased states, and the way that we're able to either fight off or succumb to various types of illnesses and ailments. And so, yeah, we're taking a deep dive into the human genome.
I mean, perfect timing for that too, like, everything we're looking at with, COVID-19 and, whether it be people, having, weak immune systems or pre-existing health conditions or, anything like that. It is, important that someone's looking into the depths of genetic breakdowns.
Yeah, and starting to gain like a deeper understanding of those types of things. And absolutely, and it was one of those things that I always want my work to impact society in a meaningful way. And there's really no more meaningful work to be doing right now than immunology. So
Couldn't agree
it's
more.
perfect.
Yeah. Well, what's the next step here? Because I mean, of course, you've taken your downtime to capitalize on, getting your word out there with the book and your foundation, which you've had for a while now. What's the next step into becoming, getting into NASA and, looking at being the first person on Mars? Like, and why is it that, how long has that been your goal? Because I know that's our goal as a, society, basically. That's the next step. We've done everything else and that's the next reach. So what makes that, align with what your goals are?
Yeah, so you've just asked me my favorite question, which is why Mars?
Yeah.
How long do we have for this podcast? 5 hours?
As long as you want. As long as you want, let's do it.
Oh boy, that's a can of worms. But I'll start by answering the beginning of that question, which is what's the next step for me, and especially what do the future steps for me before I apply to the NASA Astronaut Corps look like? So I'm finishing out my time at the Jackson Lab over this next year, and during that time, I'm also going to be applying to graduate schools to do a PhD program that I'll hopefully be entering into next year. That's a really important part of becoming an astronaut with NASA, because even though NASA doesn't require a PhD, they actually used to only require an undergraduate degree. They just recently changed that requirement to be a minimum of a master's. But the reality of the matter is that the minimum requirements to become an astronaut are never what you'll actually become an astronaut with. If you look at, every past class of astronauts, you'll find that the vast majority of them have advanced degrees and have, in some cases, multiple PhDs and huge spans of work experience and expertise and all of that. And so that's always been, to me, one of those really big steps that I need to take before even applying to the astronaut corps is getting a PhD in my field of research. So that's one big step that I'll be taking over the next couple years, and over this year, actually, I'm also studying for my instrument rating and training for that, which is a part of flying. So I currently have a pilot's license. It's a private pilot's license. The next step after that, or at least what a lot of people would consider to be the logical next step, is an instrument rating, which allows you to fly in inclement weather and have more control and understanding. So that's one that I'm working on right now. So those are the two really big portions that I have ahead of me right now. And then a PhD usually takes somewhere between 4 and 6 years. So that's about the minimum amount of time before I'd start applying to become an astronaut. Now, since that wasn't enough talking, I'll
we need the context there, because you're looking at, we're looking at probably realistically that long before this is a possibility to get there, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
We're still a ways out from putting humans on Mars. And so it would be silly. And this is something that I hope that if there are any young people out there who are listening who want to become astronauts, that they hear this and know that it is a long road towards becoming an astronaut. But that's okay, because the most exciting parts of space exploration, or at least what I think is the most exciting, which is going to Mars, is still a ways ahead of us. And so there's time. There's time to go through the process of really getting ready to apply to the program. There's time for me, and there's time for people even younger than me to follow this dream. As for why we should go to Mars, I think that there are three main reasons why we should go to Mars. And these are reasons that align really closely with my personal views, and also why I think that it's part of our culture right now. And it's something that a lot of people, not just in the United States, but around the world as a whole, have started to think about and to talk about and to become aware of, really, is this idea of putting humans on another planet, and specifically Mars. So these three reasons. The first one is because space exploration has a history, a long history of producing technologies and research and answers that actually benefit us here on Earth. There's all kinds of things that space exploration have done. You know, the most famous of those, or the most well-known, might be Tang, the drink that came from space. But the reality,
Yeah.
which is a funny
I don't
one.
even look. People my age and younger probably don't even know what that is. I'm you know, I know why you know what that is. But
Right, because I'm a big space nerd.
exactly, yeah.
But so, yeah, so I'm glad that people are starting to not know that one anymore, because it's a ridiculous example. Because the reality of spin-off technologies from space exploration aren't, you know, freeze-dried astronaut ice cream or Tang drink or anything like that. They're actually what we're doing right now. This ability for you and I to be in different locations and to be discussing and chatting and sharing information with one another. That's a direct result of space exploration. There's all kinds of different technologies and things in our houses, in our cars, in our devices, in our medical procedures, in the way that we grow crops, and the way that we every part of our society, I would say, has been affected in a positive way by space exploration. But the way that those positive effects happen isn't just by like going into space and doing stuff. It's by challenging ourselves in space, by asking ourselves, what's the most difficult thing that we can do, but still have a reasonable chance of being successful at? Because when we put ourselves into those really difficult conditions, where we have to find answers, we have to innovate and discover in order to not only survive, but thrive, that's where you see really the jumps in technology and the jumps in understanding and in knowledge that come back down and benefit us here on Earth. And so right now, we're, you know, getting a little too comfortable, I think, in low Earth orbit.
Oh, of course.
We've been there forever.
Yeah.
So it's time to say, what's the next big challenge that we can do that will really continue to push our boundaries, really continue to create these benefits here on Earth? And I think that the most difficult thing that we could still reasonably do right now is put humans on Mars and bring them back. That's one huge reason.
Yeah.
And another reason is that it inspires people. That space exploration, simply put, inspires people, and especially doing something as big as going to Mars.
Yeah, I mean, you have, I don't want to cut you off real quick, but
no, go for
it. We've been through decades where this hasn't been something that's been broadcasted as, you know, to the global citizens, you know, basically that this is something we're going to come together and do as a human race for the good of the Earth itself. This is something that we just haven't discussed lately, you know, with everything going on and we're worried about what's going on here. There hasn't been something that has been sought after in a while.
Mm-hmm.
So you saying that, you know, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And for people, I like what you said a second ago when you were talking about just going to space just to go and do something, you know, with no importance. Like a lot of people, you know, from the ages of probably, I don't know, mid-30s down to, you know, teens that are, you know, looking into these things now really haven't seen the benefits that have been broken down of space exploration because we just haven't had, you know, a detrimental journey lately.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where when you think about the way that people in probably our parents' generation, my parents are a little young for this, but my grandparents' generation
Right.
were watching, they were 9 or 10 years old watching the Apollo mission launch, watching them land and walk on the moon.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just people in the United States.
That was worldwide.
This was worldwide. It was global.
Yeah.
And it was something that tied people together. It reminded them that we're all human. It taught kids, it taught an entire generation of kids that no dream is too big, that anything is possible. And it really, to put it in kind of crass terms, it lured kids into STEM.
Yeah.
As well, which is important. It inspired and excited kids in general, but it also brought up an entire generation of young people who were much more literate and much more engaged in STEM subjects, and were able to build a backbone, a workforce that was able to take on all these new technologies and really run with them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the same kind of thing that we could see and that could happen from going to Mars, from putting humans on Mars, is we're going to see that kind of lifting up of everyone around the world.
It's extremely exciting for our generation because I feel like it's going to happen. So now, talking about that, what do you think? Are we looking at like 5 years, 10 years? And what's that trip entail? How long versus, just a trip to the moon, per se, because that's really all we would have to put in perspective.
Yeah.
So can you answer those questions? What do you think?
Yeah, so definitely. I always have to preface these kinds of questions with saying, like, I can't tell the future, so I can't give any specific answers. Yeah. But I've been around this industry for a while. I have my my finger in a lot of pots here, where I know a lot of people in different parts of the space industry and different sectors and portions of it. So I'm able to say that I don't think we're there yet. We're not 5 years out. In my opinion, we're not 10 years out either, putting humans on Mars. I think that somewhere in the 2030s is the earliest that we could like reasonably say, like, that's the earliest I'd be comfortable saying, it could happen then. Somewhere maybe mid 2030s, late 2030s, something in that decade. And the reason that I say this is because to go to Mars requires so much more than just getting there and back. Getting there and back is already difficult enough.
Right.
It's really an achievement just to get a rocket, whether or not it's carrying humans, to get any sort of payload from Earth to Mars and then to get it back, like, huge achievement. But you have to then take into account that not only do you need the transportation, you also need to be able to land properly on the surface, to land much larger cargoes and payloads than we've ever landed before, which is a particular challenge on Mars. You need to be able to grow food and sustain astronauts. You need to have all these types of life support systems that are capable of a long journey. You need to have some sort of habitat on the surface if there's going to be an extended duration stay.
Yeah.
That protection from radiation. You even need to think about how you're going to take care of astronauts' mental health during a mission where they will be more separated from Earth than any person has ever been before. What are we looking at time-wise? Like, if you were to map that out in, days? So how long it would take to get to and from? Yeah, so it's, when Earth and Mars are optimally positioned in their orbits to be the shortest distance between the two for transit, it takes about 6 to 8 months to get there. That's crazy. And then it would take the same to get back. It's crazy. It's incredibly long. And to put that into, as you asked for, to put that into like an understandable range based on the moon, it takes 3 days to get to the moon. Oh, gosh. That's the farthest we've ever gone. Yeah. That's the difference between doing a weekend trip at the cabin and accidentally getting stuck in the Arctic for a year. Like, that's how insanely different these two ideas are. And a big part of what makes Mars like this crazy, like, out there idea for humans to go visit isn't just how far it is to travel there, but how far it is for information to travel to Mars as well. Because you have to think that if you're on the moon, let's say you're an astronaut and you're on the moon and you suddenly have a medical emergency. Let's say that you have an emergency, it's medical in nature. You and your crewmates don't have the specific training to deal with this specific instance. You dial up NASA. Mm-hmm. You dial them up and say, get a cardiac surgeon on the phone with me, and they'll walk you through everything that you need to do to fix this problem or to have the best chance at fixing it. If you're on Mars and you have a medical emergency or any other type of emergency happen, you can't just call back to Earth, because it can take up to 40 minutes for a radio signal to get from Mars to Earth. And then you have this huge time lag. And so it's this idea of the first time that we've ever done something that requires independence from Earth. So Earth independent travel, not just in materials and in distance of transit, but also in distance of information, because you have to be able to handle any problem.
Yeah, I mean, you have
arises.
Yeah, you have a completely different atmosphere. You have no real-time surveillance at that point, you know. So like if something were to happen and it takes 40 minutes for you to get, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah, you have to be able to deal with it then and there with just the people, just the equipment that you have, just the expertise that you have, which really does make it very different from anything that we've done before. And that's a big part of what makes it so worthwhile to do as well. Like we said, putting ourselves in these situations that require us to change the way that we do things.
Yeah.
I think that going to Mars is going to be our first step into Earth independent travel. And once we do that, once we learn how to explore Mars with humans, then that's going to open up the rest of our solar system, and who knows how much farther once we have these skills and these tools and abilities. It's kind of like a crazy thought, right?
I mean, but it's, you know, we can fathom it now, you know, and, you know, and if we're talking about 20 years from, well, you know, 10 years from now or 15
Somewhere
years,
in that span, yeah.
You know, imagine what technology is going to do in that time, you know. Elon Musk,
incredible.
help us. But well, and on that subject, what's your opinion on you know, private space travel and what's happening with SpaceX and stuff like that? Are you into that at all? Do you pay attention to that stuff?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the privatization of the space industry is really an exciting thing to see happen, and it's also an important thing. It's an important step in space exploration to see happen for a couple reasons. One of them is that obviously the more players you have, the better, because you start to have more ideas, you have more resources going into space exploration, you have resources and ideas coming from a different direction than what's been traditionally done before. And all of that adds up together to create things that we never thought that we'd be able to do, or that weren't even ideas, such as reusable rockets that you can land portions of them back on and reuse them again. That's incredible. That's revolutionary. There are all kinds of you know, things like that. Other ideas like inflatable spacecraft that will be able to house populations, things like that really have the chance to change the way that we do space exploration. That's an important part of privatization. Another important part is increased access and opportunity to experience and participate in space exploration, which is that the more private and public industry that you have participating in space exploration, the more opportunity you have for the everyday Joe, the everyday person, to be a part of it. Just like with air travel, you know, the first couple airplanes, it wasn't people like you and I who were going out and getting to fly on them, versus nowadays air travel is such a common thing and such a common experience.
Right.
I think that we're looking at something like that with space exploration, that it's going to take a little bit longer than it did for air travel and for flight, because it's magnitudes more difficult and magnitudes more dangerous. But eventually I hope that we get to that point where it's something that is much more accessible to the general public.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at something the other day where we're looking at, you know, possibly having private flights into space, just there and back, you know, like a commercial flight. You know, of course, it's going to cost 20 times the price because of the price of fuel and the distance and all that. But still, just like you said, putting that perspective of that's what we were looking at, you know, 50 years ago with private, you know, aircraft travel. So.
Yeah, and it used to be that you know, it's never been quite as, at least from my perspective, it's never been quite as expensive as space exploration. But right now, space exploration really, for at least for private flight for people who are private citizens who are traveling to space, is so incredibly expensive. But I think that we, people in our generation, people who are growing up now, are going to see that price come down a lot, of course, in their lifetimes, which is an exciting thought and idea.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be it's definitely interesting. There's a lot that I feel like is going to happen, and you're right at the front of it. You know, that's exciting.
Yeah, no, it's I always tell people that this is the golden age to be alive in if you are interested in space exploration. Sure, Apollo was cool, all of that,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Right now, this is the time to be alive to see history made.
No, I completely agree. There's a lot of things happening. Well, what about so what about well, let's talk about the nonprofit first. So how did that come about? And you know, I know it aligns with STEM and what you're passionate about, but how does it how does it work cohesively with what your mission is to do in life other than just, provide education?
Yeah, so the Mars Generation nonprofit, I co-founded it about 5 years ago. I actually co-founded it with my mom.
Awesome.
And we started that when I was 18 years old. The story leading up to the nonprofit is that from the age of about 13, I'd say, up until I was 18, I was doing a lot of science communication, and it wasn't something I ever intended to do. It was something that just kind of happened and snowballed. Where when I was 13, my mom helped me set up a Twitter account because I was working on a school project, an extracurricular project, where I wanted to get a primary source quote from an expert in space exploration to
Okay.
support it. And she said, "Oh, well, you should get on Twitter and we'll start contacting people there."
Yeah.
And amazingly, I was able to have a phone call with um, uh, a life support systems engineer who worked on the International Space Station, who worked on the systems on the International Space
Oh,
Station. And so I fulfilled that portion. But what happened that I didn't expect from that, which is that when I went on Twitter and I started talking about these big dreams that I had of wanting to become an astronaut and wanting to go to Mars, I got this incredible outpouring of people who were really excited and interested in that. And it encouraged me to continue talking about my dream, to continue sharing it through social media, to do all of that. And eventually I built up, I'm now at about roughly 1 million followers on social media who I get to share STEM with. And because of that, I was really inspired as a teenager to not just do science communication through social media and through content creation, but also to actually go into schools to talk to student groups about STEM and about how exciting space was and about all these opportunities in our future. And then when I was 15, I partnered with an astronaut, Luca Parmitano, who was going to the International Space Station for 6 months. And I partnered with him as his Earth liaison, is what we called it, trying to share his experiences living and working in space with people here on Earth, and especially trying to reach out to a demographic that I was really suited to reach out to, which was girls and young women,
yeah.
and share how exciting space exploration was. And so all of that over the years was all this experience I had doing STEM outreach and education. And when I turned 18 and I went away to college, my mom and I were talking about this, and I had all this support from other people in various industries and specialties. And someone mentioned to us, you should start a nonprofit. You should make this more official. Make this something that carries forward as a legacy.
Mhm.
And so we did. We started a nonprofit, and we've now been able to do a lot of really great stuff with it. One of the programs that we run through the Mars Generation that I'm really incredibly proud of is our Space Camp Scholarship Program. And the reason that this one's so important to me is that when I was a teenager, when I was 13, I went to space camp for the first time. And I actually my family couldn't afford it because I was raised by a single mom who had 2 daughters, and she was a high school teacher.
Understand?
So yeah, it was
Same
this
here.
thing.
Same
Yeah,
here.
so you understand that she
Yeah.
actually, when she first heard about space camp, someone told her about it when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And my mom chose not to tell me that space camp existed because she knew that we couldn't afford
Right.
$1,000 for a week of camp.
Yeah.
And then I found out about it a couple of years ago on my own. And we ended up finding a nonprofit that helped give a partial scholarship so that I was able to go, which was this really cool experience to get to go and see rockets in person, to meet other kids who also loved space, all of that. And it was really something that I credit as, especially during those teenage years, I think it's really easy for kids, but especially for girls, to become discouraged chasing after their dreams. And one of the primary ways to fight against that discouragement and that dropping out of STEM subjects is to have experiences that reinforce how exciting and how important they are. And that was one of those for me. Flash forward 10 years later, I'm 23. My mom and I founded this nonprofit. We've now sent more than 45 kids living at or below the poverty line to space camp on full scholarships. Yeah, which is one of these things where I'm like, never thought that that would be my story, to say that I went from going to space camp on a scholarship to now paying it forward to such a magnitude.
That's amazing, because you were able to reach out to someone that was able to participate, which gave what were basically what you were doing, and gave it just more attention. And then what we have now is we have platforms to reach everyone, and it's just amazing that you're able to do that. And
Thank you. And it's one of those incredible things about I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just feel like it's such an important thing to mention, that part of what makes my nonprofit so powerful, we do some physical stuff like the Space Camp scholarships and a couple other programs, but a lot of our work is actually digital. A lot of it goes on with creating content and creating opportunities and creating community and all of that digitally. And it's something that 20 years ago, you wouldn't be able to have this kind of a thing happen. You wouldn't be able to have a nonprofit that serves people around the entire world. And now we do, because of this incredible technology that once again ties back directly to spaceflight.
Well, I mean, it's definitely amazing too. And you mentioned, focusing on young women, who may, want to do something, and if this is one of their, prime interests. This was a really sexist and segregated, industry for a long time.
Absolutely.
A lot of people don't talk about it, but I mean, that's the truth. So what you're doing, to add to that is just another part of that movement, which is great.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate hearing that, because it is the truth that there's it can be hard to talk about sometimes and to think about, because especially in the United States, our space program is such a point of national pride for us. It's such a point of being able to look at it and say, like, we did that. How amazing was that? How incredible. But when you delve into it, and when you dive into it, especially in the early years of the space program, but sadly continuing even up until this day, it's not been a prideful place for women and for women's representation. There are tons of examples throughout history of ways that women were really, really barred from participating, unreasonably so. And it was such a difficult field. And I look at that and I say that we've come really far so far to this day and age, but we still have a lot of distance to go. For example, aeronautics and aviation is you could say it's a sibling field to space exploration. They're really strongly tied together. Only 5% of pilots in the United States are women.
That's insane.
That's an insane number. And it shows that we have a lot of work left to do. And some of that work happens through representation and through women being willing, and then also having the platform to share their stories in these fields. And so that's something that I've always been really passionate about, is that, like, I have a voice and I'm absolutely going to be loud in using it.
You're using it. That's a great thing. I mean, you really are. And I think that's the most exciting thing, when you mention, I mean, all of it's crazy exciting to me, but when you mention that, I'm like, well, that stands out to me as soon as you said that, because that's something that is not talked about, that needs to be talked about.
Thank you. Yeah.
So the book, let's talk about that for a second. What are you doing with that? What's the name of it? Where can people find it at? And you just published that, this last month?
Yeah, it was, I published it about 2 weeks ago. It came out.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I know your reader or your listeners can't actually see this, but
some of them can. We do video too, so some of them can see it, but yeah.
Okay, I would have made sure my lighting was better.
Oh, you look great. You're good.
So here's the book. It's called Dream Big, How to Reach for Your Stars. I published it, like we said, just about 2 weeks ago with Penguin Random House Publishers. And it's a guidebook that is intended for anyone really, but especially focused towards young people and young adults, really teaching them how and leading them on how to realize what it is that they're passionate about, what their dreams are, and then how they can actually go about achieving those and being successful at achieving those dreams. And so it walks you through all the steps. of how to do that. And I've had people ask me over the last couple of weeks with all these interviews I've been doing for this, I've had people ask me, well, why did you write it? And the answer for that is because I've had so many incredible experiences chasing after my dream over the last 2 decades. I've learned a lot from meeting people, from hearing their advice, from talking to people who have achieved insanely big dreams. And I've also had to learn some of the parts along my own dream the hard way. I've had to learn what it means to fail. I've had to learn how to pick yourself back up after that. I've had to learn how to find mentors. And so for some of these things, I was lucky enough to get taught them, and some of them I had to learn the hard way. And I wanted to write a book that really put all of that in one place and made it so that hopefully those tools and skills and lessons that I've learned are available to the next generation to be able to just hit the ground running right away with their own dreams. So it's full of advice, it's full of tools and skills, it's full of fun anecdotes and stories, like the time that I hung up on Buzz Aldrin because I thought he was a telemarketer.
Oh God. Hold on. You gotta tell me that story real quick. Tell me that story, please. What happened?
That's a story that not a lot of people get to, or a phrase that not a lot of people can say.
No. First off, let's let everyone know who that is if they don't know who that is.
Right. So Buzz Aldrin, the second person to walk on the moon. So when I was probably 18 at the time, and I'd founded this nonprofit a couple months earlier. I was in college. I was actually sitting in the library studying, and the word had gotten through the grapevine to Buzz Aldrin. He'd heard about me. He'd heard about the work that I'd been doing in science communication and outreach. He'd heard about the nonprofit, and he wanted to chat. He wanted to talk about, because he runs a foundation as well that's Mars focused, and he's really involved in trying to inspire and excite the next generation in space. And so when he heard that there was this young person who was up and coming doing the same thing, he was like, we should talk. And so he got my number from someone who knew someone who knew someone, somehow through the grapevine. He got my phone number and he called me. And like I said, I was sitting in the library studying, and I got this call on my phone, and I looked at it and I was like, who the hell is that? Like, hang up. Like, I'm not going to answer that. People in our generation don't answer their phones if they don't recognize the number.
If we don't know the number yet, we're not going to answer.
I hardly even answer my phone when I do recognize the number. Like, the only person who I'm sure to answer for always is my grandmother.
Yeah.
Anyone else, it's like, oh, you might get.
Yeah.
And so this unknown number, I was like, there's no way. I hung up. I didn't think about it. I got another call. It happened 1 or 2 more times. I kept, just saying no. And then about 20 minutes later, I got a phone call from my mom, and I answered this one, and she's like yelling with half exasperation and half excitement on the phone saying, I just heard from such and such that they gave your phone number to Buzz Aldrin, and he's trying to call you and you won't answer your phone. And I'm there like, what?
It's crazy.
Is this a practical joke? It turns out it wasn't a practical joke. To make it worse, I walk in, I was late because I was on the phone with my mom talking about Buzz Aldrin, and she was saying like, I'm setting up a time for you to talk to him tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. Like, it'll happen, don't worry. I'm like, okay, I gotta go though, because I have a class I have to be in. I walk into my class late, and the professor's lecturing, and of course he looks at me and is like, well, you better have a good excuse for being late to my class. And I'm standing there, I'm a first year in college, I'm all sheepish, and I'm like, very quietly, I'm like, I don't know if this counts as a good excuse, but I was on the phone, Buzz Aldrin was trying to call me, and his jaw drops, and he turns to the rest of the class and can't just let me have this private moment. He says, who else here has ever talked to Buzz Aldrin on the phone?
Yeah, that's definitely not a made-up excuse.
Right? Like, you have to be really audacious.
There's no way.
To walk in there and say that.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's great.
So to bring it back to dream big, this book is filled with fun stories like that about silly, crazy, sometimes scary, sometimes funny experiences that I've had. It's filled with a lot of really fun activities actually that'll help the reader practice the skills rather than just reading about them and forgetting about them, actually practicing the skills that I talk about so that they can integrate them into their toolkit to help them reach their dreams. And then I have to give a plug also that the artwork in the book is really amazing. I got to work with an artist on this who brought my words to life in a way that I that I couldn't have imagined. So it's a really beautiful book, I think.
No, that's great. I mean, and it's, you've done so much in such a short amount of time, and I feel like you're going to do a lot more. So we've talked about all those things. I have a few questions. Okay. Life outside of the Earth. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think absolutely. So my field of study when I was in my undergraduate, the research I did was in astrobiology.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically looking at the possibility of extraterrestrial life.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's almost a certainty. Obviously, I could be wrong, but I think it's very likely that life exists in some way, shape, or form off of Earth.
Yeah.
I think that where a lot of people get hung up on this and like go, whoa, what? When I say that is that I'm not necessarily talking about what you'd usually consider to be alien life. I'm not talking about an alien the size of you or me with green skin and 8 eyeballs and tentacles. I'm more so talking about something that's probably single cellular, something that's more similar to bacteria or possibly to viruses, things like that at a much simpler level of biology.
Well, I mean, it's something that, we've, over the years, this is what Hollywood does, but it's like there's no way that there's not, single cell organisms out there. If you have other planets with atmospheres.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's gotta be some kind of life there, and to say that there isn't, it's crazy to me from what we've done already,
Absolutely. And life is so much more, how to put it, I think they put it best in Jurassic Park, dare I quote that, life finds a way.
Yeah.
So it's not just that it has to be the perfect planet in order to find life. There's actually possibility in a lot of ways for life to adapt to what seems like incredible and impossible circumstances. I actually, when I was doing my research in astrobiology, part of what I was studying and working on was a bacteria that was from Earth. So I'm not saying we found extraterrestrial life yet, but it was found here on Earth, but it has the ability to exist on the surface of Mars. Okay. So under the Martian surface conditions, which up until we found this organism, almost all of the other life here on Earth that we knew of would not be able to survive that, namely because of the incredibly low atmospheric pressure that Mars has. And yet there was this one kind of bacteria that was able to really thrive under those conditions. And so that makes you look at Mars and say, okay, so Mars, what about Venus? Yeah. What about Enceladus? What about all these other places within our own solar system that we might have previously ruled out or thought, there's no way, that's not hospitable, that's too difficult for life to survive there. Well, it turns out that maybe it is, but maybe it's not. And the only way to really discover that and answer that question is to go check it out.
That's right. Well, what are we looking at? What are we looking at for existing atmosphere in Mars? What is that constructed of?
So Mars's atmosphere is about 1/100th of Earth's atmosphere. So it's much, much less. It's about 5 to 10 millibars in most places. And it's primarily composed of carbon dioxide. So here on Earth, we have an atmosphere that's nitrogen and oxygen with other trace gases. On Mars, you almost exclusively have carbon dioxide and you have almost no free oxygen floating around, which is a little bit of an issue for most life forms that we know. But it turns out that, like I said, it's not a death sentence.
To put it into perspective, so you have something living in the ocean that's 2,000 feet below sea level, that doesn't use the same atmosphere. They don't operate the same. It's not.
Yeah, they don't operate. They don't exist under the same constraints.
It's not. We can't fathom it. It doesn't relate to how we breathe and even fish higher up in sea level. So that would be a good comparison for people who may not understand that. So if you did have life on that planet, it would be something to compare to that exists in an atmosphere that's not something we have of comparison.
Absolutely. That's a really, really good comparison to make, both for us to understand and think about how different life could be elsewhere in our solar system. And it's actually one that a lot of astrobiological researchers there's an overlap. There's a linkage between marine biology, and especially deep sea marine biology, and astrobiology. You'll find a lot of these people sometimes have expertise in both, or are studying very similar things, but from a different direction. And the reason is because it turns out that the deep sea, and especially trying to explore in the deep sea, is very similar to trying to explore in outer space.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sure.
I mean, it makes complete sense. I mean, I feel like that, saying that would, correlate there. But another thing, I saw an article today randomly, literally right before we had this podcast. I don't know how, but it popped up that supposedly the Earth is spinning faster now than it has been. Is that true, or is that just something that's?
So it is something that, without having read the specific article, I can't really speak to the specifics of why they're saying that, but it is ever so slightly true that because of the way that the Earth and the Moon are connected to one another by gravitational forces, that over time, over like huge astronomical periods of time and scales of time, the Moon is slowing down. It's orbiting less quickly, and it's and on the flip side of that, Earth's rotation is speeding up a little bit. So they're dragging on each other in different ways. Then again, like I said, that might be what they're referring to.
Right. It was in reference to
some other.
It was in reference to having shorter days now. Based on Earth spinning quicker. I'm not sure if that. What I didn't have time to dive into it and fact check it or anything. But I was like, well, this is interesting because I'm about to talk about this. Let's bring it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think that that's what they were referring to, is that it has, like, that effect has ever so slightly shortened the time span of a day and night cycle here on Earth, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense too. That's interesting. So what I know you work your brain out. You seem to be very intelligent and have quite a bit of stamina up there. What about training to be an astronaut is something else that takes a physical toll on your body as well. What do you do? Are you doing things to, do you work out? Do you eat healthy? Like, what's your regimen for that?
Absolutely. So that's one of the parts that I take very seriously towards becoming an astronaut, is this idea of health, and the idea especially that the type of health that will actually benefit you in space isn't the kind of health that you can just pick up 6 months before you go to space and say, I'm going to start working out. I'm going to start eating better.
Go keto real quick.
Yeah, real quick. because what it comes down to is that the type of health that's needed for space exploration is really deep. It's a lot deeper than like surface level stuff. It's that you need strong bones, you need well-developed muscles, and you also need well-developed habits and mental patterns that allow you to physically take care of yourself, because in space they have to exercise sometimes every single day. They have to exercise for sometimes 2 hours, sometimes as much as 4 hours, just to fight off to some extent the effects of microgravity on your bones and muscles. So personally, I take that very seriously as something that I can do now to build up over this long period of time to have the best shot at being healthy in space. I've done a lot of different types of stuff for exercise over the years. When I was in college, I was an NCAA diver, so a springboard diver.
I was about to bring that up. I thought I saw that, but I know that that's really like diving, and your breathing is really like directly related to. It's interesting because we were talking about sea, ocean stuff.
Yeah.
It's directly related to, the atmospheric change and stuff like that.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, it gets a little bit confusing when I mention this, because I actually did two different kinds of diving. Okay. One of them was scuba diving, and that's more related to training for microgravity and experiencing what the feelings of that are because of the neutral buoyancy of water. Right. And the other type of diving that I did was springboard diving, which is like jumping off of boards and doing flips. And so that's not so much directly related to space exploration as it was a way that I stayed healthy and fit in college. Right. Now that I'm out of college and I'm not a collegiate athlete anymore, I stay healthy through, I do a lot of hiking, I do a lot of running. So I run between 4 and 8 miles every day. I do a lot of biking, stuff like that, just to really try and stay healthy. And especially now during the pandemic, I've been spending a lot of time trying to make sure to continue those kinds of healthy habits, even without the community aspect that a lot of us look for.
Yeah. What kind of diet?
What kind of diet? I
Yeah.
eat a pretty normal diet. I don't have
Okay.
any major restrictions or like anything that I do intentionally. I do try to avoid gluten. I think that that's not just because of fad,
No,
but
me too. Me too. I completely agree. When I eat it, I feel like crap. You know,
yeah, I
I've been
don't
off of it
have.
for a long time. Like it, I'm a supporter of that. No gluten.
Hey, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Because I don't have an official diagnosis towards anything like that, like an intolerance or anything. But like you, I just felt different when I don't eat
Yep.
it. And so I try to avoid gluten. I try to eat a relatively healthy diet, like
Mhm.
lots of fresh fruit and veggies and all that, stay hydrated. But I'd say that those are the biggest things. I'm not crazy about it. I'm just like everyone else. I like a good steak every now and
Oh yeah.
then.
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but I just, I wanted to ask you those things because I feel like that I want to talk about every single element of what it's going to take, because
Yeah.
you seem to have it all laid out, so it's like at this point, you just got to continue your path.
That's the hope. That's the hope. And I'm glad that you're asking all of these questions about each and every portion
Yeah.
of this dream and what it takes to hopefully reach this dream, because the reality is that it's all encompassing. It's not the kind of dream that you can have and you can just put
No,
50% of
no,
yourself towards. You have to
no.
be all in on something like this.
This is a long road, and the standards have evolved. The what people used to have to do 50 years ago to become an astronaut, or 30 years ago, is not near as what it is now. Your knowledge,
Absolutely.
you're having to do way more intellectual work, and strengthen your everything. Like
Definitely. And I was actually just for the launch of my book, I was really fortunate to be joined by astronaut Scott Kelly, who, for those listening who might not know who Scott Kelly is, he was a NASA astronaut. He holds the record for having spent the most time in space of
well,
anyone. And he joined me for the launch of my book party to interview me and to talk about it. And one of the things that he said at the end was that when he was 23, he hadn't done any of the stuff that I'd done. And he told me, I think you're on a great path towards
yeah.
achieving this. Just keep on keeping on. And I agree with him that I am on hopefully a great path, but I also think that times have changed. It's a lot more difficult. Like you were saying, it's
Yeah.
a lot more difficult now to
Well, I
become
mean,
an
the standards have
astronaut.
been set, more, higher standards have been set. What's the youngest age? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure that the youngest person to go to space was 27,
Okay.
somewhere around there.
You may get
So
there. You may get there.
I
But I mean,
don't
I
have
think,
any illusions. I don't have any
yeah.
illusions.
But
I'm
I mean,
not shooting for like an age-based thing. I just want
of
to get
course,
there.
I understand. No, I understand it. And then again, if those standards were set that, weren't what they are now, then that, the restrictions not the same,
Yeah, it's very different these days.
Yeah.
And that said, though, I feel really fortunate to. I don't think I have it all figured out, but I think that I'm on a good path towards
Yeah.
keeping on towards.
Well, what do you do? Yeah, I see. Look, you seem to be very busy. You have your, head on this goal. You know what you're going to do. The trajectory is there. What do you do for fun in your spare time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when you have a dream like this that is really a marathon,
Yeah.
not a sprint,
Yeah.
you have to take time to enjoy life along the way as well. And
Mhm.
that's something that I look at, this idea of like work-life balance, not just between my day job at the lab, but also between everything else that I do. I try and find a balance with my normal life, you could say. Before the pandemic, one of my greatest hobbies and passions was dancing.
Okay.
So I danced ballet, and I also
Nice.
danced Latin dance and waltz and blues and all these different styles of like partner dance. And
Mhm.
so multiple times a week, you'd find me out at some grungy bar dancing,
Hey, I mean,
which was a lot of fun.
yeah.
Now, obviously, that's not really a thing that's happening
Yeah.
because we have to protect each other and whatnot. But I've been spending a lot of time uh, doing art. I paint, and I play violin and fiddle,
Okay.
and just things like that, things that I am happy to be reconnecting with at home during this time.
Yeah. Yeah, you're blowing my mind. You're too busy.
Oh, and I sew my own clothing sometimes.
That's cool.
That's another
Well, that's
another fun
interesting
thing that
because
I'm like,
that's
yeah.
yeah, that brings it back right there. That's something that's simple but yet very, unique.
Yeah, and it's really
There's a lot of art to that too. That's cool. That's really cool.
thank you. It's
Um,
a fun project.
I bet it is. So what before we wrap up, is there anything that, well, first off, who's the best demographic for your book? You said younger women, but also I feel like it could be great for anyone.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I've already been hearing from people who have picked it up and who have been reviewing it and talking about it, is that I've heard from people of every age that they've loved it, that they've found it helpful, all of these things. So I think that it's really appropriate for anyone of any age and any stage in their life. And that's one of the tenets in this book also, is that you're never too young to start dreaming and chasing after a dream, and you're also never too old. There's no like path that you have to follow, but there are skills that you can learn that'll help you no matter where you are. So it's really good for anyone. It is slightly more focused towards a younger demographic, so it's especially good for younger people.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, so where do we get that at?
Yeah, so it is available anywhere that you would buy books. So that's at most major bookstores. It's available online and through places like Amazon. It's also available, and I would encourage everyone who's listening, if you want to pick up a copy, to call and ask your local indie bookshop. A lot of them are carrying it as well, and to support local business in buying it.
Heck yeah, I like it. Awesome.
For sure.
Is there any advice you want to give anyone, and just like we were mentioning, not necessarily the younger demographic, but anyone at all, because I feel like that you're someone, and then again, like, it's crazy because I think you're the first guest that's younger than me, which is crazy. So now I feel old. And it's just motivating, and it's really exciting. So what are some, some kind of, advice or anything that you may, have any kind of words of wisdom to anyone who may be, whether it's facing challenges, making life decisions, which, are its own thing in itself, to just finding some kind of meaning or, way to move forward.
Yeah, so the best piece of advice that I could give anyone, no matter if they're in the process of chasing after their own dream, or maybe they're facing a challenge or a difficulty in life, no matter what's going on, the best piece of overarching advice I have is to be ready to fail. And
I love it.
Isn't that it sounds like such off the cuff, it sounds like such a bad thing to say, but that's
gonna make me rant now.
I know, right?
No, because
it's inflammatory.
I mean, if you haven't had an experience, it's just like the fifth place trophy. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like the participation award when we were younger. Like, if you haven't had a chance to lose, then you're not going to have the motivation to win. And it doesn't have to be in competition, in competitive sports or anything like that. It could be just with yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
You can only learn about yourself when you fail. If you don't fail, how do you know how to pick yourself up when you hit something?
It's definitely the quickest way to learn, and I think one of the best ways to learn. And I also think that a lot of times we get caught up in this mindset, and it's something that society tells us a lot. And so I don't blame anyone, because I've struggled with this mindset all the time. I still struggle with it all the time. This idea that failure is, first off, that it's a personal reflection of you and your value and your capability, and second off, that it is the end of the line, that it's the end of the road for your dream, or for whatever it is that you're doing and chasing. And the truth of the matter is that it is neither of those things. Failure happens no matter what. Failure happens. It happens to everyone at some point in time. To a lot of us, it happens more than once. It happens a lot. And the reality of the fact is that that's part of life, and it's not a reflection of you or your worth or your capability, because life is going to throw you curveballs. It's going to throw you failures no matter how capable you are. And it's not the end of the line for your dream either. It's actually a really important step, I think. I think that when I look back on my sage 23 years, so yeah, I can make fun of my age as well. When I look back on that, though, some of the some of the most important memories that I have are of failure. And I look at them and I say that that really hurt at the time. That was really hard. It felt really hard, but it actually propelled me further towards my dream than I would have been if I hadn't failed in the first place, or if I hadn't failed at all. And it ended up being something that really positively impacted my ability to get closer to this dream of space flight.
I mean, I think it's amazing. Like, what excites me about you is that it's very evident now at this point that this has been your dream. It wasn't a parent. It wasn't, you know, someone that pushing you to do something you weren't excited about, which happens a lot with people, you know, growing up. This is something you pursued. You've been motivated to do. It sounds like you've done more than most people have done in a lifetime in 23 years, which is extremely exciting as well. So everything that you're saying has so much, you know, value to it because you've already done all these things and there's so much more to do. So it's just really exciting.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story and everything with you and with your audience today.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. What so social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, what's your handle on Instagram?
Astronaut Abby Official.
Okay.
And so you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter as Astronaut Abby. I'm on Facebook as Astronaut Abby. I'm on TikTok, I guess, as Astronaut Abby. I'm on YouTube as Astronaut Abby. And then the other ones that I would throw out there as well are that you can follow my nonprofit on all of those same social media channels as the Mars Generation. And I would definitely encourage everyone to take a look at that.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and everyone please subscribe to the podcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.